This is the Stanley and Brown safety plan. This safety plan was developed for suicide risk, but it can be used for so many different things. So when I was a practicing therapist, I used this safety plan for people who were experiencing grief, who were trying to recover from an eating disorder, who were thinking about suicide, right? So you can use it for a lot of different reasons. The first thing on the safety plan is what are some warning signs that arise that indicate that a crisis may be developing or that a crisis is already happening. When you're walking through this with youth, you might have to provide some examples. So warning signs, and we want to do that from the context of our own selves. So we're not going to try to assign warning signs to the youth, right? We can provide examples from our own context and see what that brings up for them. So it might sound like, when I'm experiencing a crisis, I tend to avoid phone calls. I sleep a lot more. I get really anxious in my stomach, and I have ruminating thoughts. Do you ever experience things like that or similar things? We want to put this specifically on the warning or on the safety plan so that you can glimpse it, right? And see, oh, I have been engaging in this avoidance behavior, which is one of my warning signs, right? So it can really help the person who is using the safety plan identify if they are in a place of struggling. And then we're going to talk about internal coping strategies. So these are things that the person can engage in by themselves, and it can typically look like a hobby, right? So this for me would look like doing some yoga, crocheting, watching some Netflix, maybe going on a walk or getting some fresh air. The third is distraction. So people or places that provide distraction. These are not going to be people that you call and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. I need some support. But you might call them and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? This could be a great time to call your friend who's really funny and makes you laugh a lot, but maybe isn't the best listener, right? Or maybe there are some places that you enjoy going that can provide distraction, like a coffee shop or the library or Target, something like that. People that you can ask for help. So these would be the people that you do call and say, hey, I'm struggling and need some support. It can be helpful to inform the person that you're putting on the safety plan that you're adding them to this so that they know if you call them and say, I'm struggling, they have some ideas of ways that they can help you. When we're working with youth, it is absolutely okay for them to put some of their friends on this step for number 4, but we also want to make sure that there's at least one adult who they can engage with if they do need some help. Step 5 are professionals you can ask for help. I always include 988 or other crisis resources depending on what the person is experiencing. So this is where you might put primary care doctors or therapists or case managers. And then making the environment safe. So, what are the methods that you typically self-harm with? Are there ways that we can put those out of sight, out of mind, lock them up, remove them from the home? Maybe you need to stay somewhere else, that kind of thing. But we're also really looking at ways to calm somebody's nervous system down. So I like to think about engaging the 5 senses. So are there certain smells that are particularly calming, textures of clothing, things that people can eat, temperature of the room, lighting, those kinds of things. It is important when working on a safety plan that we don't put pressure on someone to have an answer for every single step. That would be ideal. And we also know that that isn't always available to people. So as long as there are other parts of the safety plan filled out, that's okay. That's a good safety plan. If someone agrees to utilize the safety plan, that's how we know it's a good one. I have seen youth make safety plans in a lot of really creative ways too. So we want to make sure that the person who's at risk is the one who's really offering up all of the ideas for the safety plan. It would be best if they were the ones writing it down. It's not always possible for that to be the case, and that's okay. I've had youth who've made collages or like personal molecules where they have like branches off of themselves. They can get really creative. It doesn't just have to be a list. So this can also just be a nice prevention activity for folks if they're looking for things to do with their students or their youth.